Another 182 unmarked graves have been discovered near a former boarding school for Indigenous children in Canada. Over 1,000 unmarked graves have now been found in the country. Anger among the Indigenous community in Canada is mounting. 2 more Catholic churches have been set ablaze, taking the total to 8. The Canadian Prime Minister's denounced the vandalism and arson.
As the Indigenous communities in Canada struggle to deal with an unthinkable loss, another 182 unmarked graves were discovered at a former Indigenous school in Canada. The discovery of graves have reopened wounds for Canada's Indigenous community. The latest discovery has been at a third former Indigenous residential school. The remains are to be believed of students aged 7 to 15 at the former St. Eugene's Mission School near Cranbrook in British Columbia. These schools were operated by the Catholic Church on behalf of the federal government from 1912 to until early 1970s. Between 1800s and the 1990s, more than 150,000 Indigenous children were forced to attend residential schools. A settlement deal with the government recognized 139 such institutions which aimed to assimilate children into the Canadian mainstream against their will. Earlier, remains of 215 children in unmarked graves were discovered at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. 751 more unmarked graves were discovered at another school in Marieval last week. In June, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that these horrific discoveries have forced Canadians to reflect on the injustices that Indigenous people have faced.
What we know is that the discovery in Kamloops is part of a larger tragedy, and that from coast to coast to coast, many children forced into the residential school system disappeared without a trace. We know that the harm caused by the legacy of these institutions plays out today in the intergenerational trauma so many families must deal with. And we know that Indigenous peoples still face racism, systemic discrimination, and unacceptable injustices.
Trudeau has also asked the Pope to come to Canada to apologize for the Catholic Church's role running residential schools for Indigenous children.
I have spoken personally, directly, with His Holiness Pope Francis to impress upon him how important it is, not just that he makes an apology, but that he makes an apology to Indigenous Canadians on Canadian soil. I know that the Catholic Church leadership is looking and very actively engaged in what next steps can be taken.
Anger among people is mounting over the mushrooming abuse scandal. Amid growing calls for a papal apology, 2 Catholic churches in Canada, Marieval Church in Alberta and St. Catherine Tequitha Church in Nova Scotia was set ablaze. In recent days, 8 churches across Canada have been destroyed or damaged by suspicious fires, most of them in Indigenous communities. Last week, a statue of Pope John Paul II was defaced outside an Edmonton church. Red paint was smeared across the base of the statue. Canadian police has launched an investigation into all incidents. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau urged people to participate in reconciliation while denouncing vandalism and arson. The flag atop Parliament has been lowered to commemorate the student's death and will remain at half-mast for the 1st of July, Canada's National Day. Bureau Report, WION World is One.